"What in the hell is this supposed to be, old-timer?" The voice, sharp and laced with the kind of manufactured authority that comes from a fresh promotion, sliced through the quiet hum of the climate-controlled briefing room. Major Jennings, his flight suit pristine and zipped to regulation perfection, stood with his hands on his hips, a look of profound irritation on his face. His glare was fixed on an old man methodically polishing the spout of a large stainless steel coffee urn. The old man Silas didn't look up. His hands, gnarled and webbed with the fine silvery lines of scars, moved with an unhurried, deliberate grace. He wore a simple gray maintenance uniform, the fabric worn thin at the elbows and knees. He looked like a relic, a piece of forgotten history in this gleaming state-of-the-art facility, a room dominated by a massive smart screen and carbon fiber conference chairs. "I asked you a question," Jennings snapped, his voice echoing slightly in the cavernous room. He gestured dismissively at the gleaming brand-new automated espresso machine against the far wall. "We have an AK-900 tactical barista, fully serviced and calibrated this morning. It can produce 300 unique coffee-based beverages. So why are you fiddling with that? That museum piece?" Silas finished his polishing, his pale blue eyes inspecting the shine. Only then did he turn his gaze to the Major. His eyes were the most remarkable thing about him. They were the color of a winter sky, and despite the deep lines crowbearing their corners, they missed nothing. They held a stillness that was both unnerving and profoundly calm. "The machine's calibration is off, sir," Silas said, his voice a low, quiet rumble with a hint of a Midwestern drawl. "Water temperature is fluctuating by about 4. Makes the coffee bitter. The generals will be drinking this for hours. It should be right." Jennings stared, incredulous. "The calibration is off. And how would you know that? Did you run a diagnostic on its particle accelerator? This isn't some backwards diner. Grandpa, this is Creature Air Force Base. This is the command center for the most advanced drone program on Earth. We don't do things the old-fashioned way." He pointed a finger at Silas. "Your job is to make sure the coffee cups are stacked. That's it. Now get that heap of junk out of here before the brass arrives." Silas didn't argue. He didn't defend himself. He simply gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. He picked up his polishing cloth and began wiping down the counter, his movements economical and precise. He had placed his own personal thermos, an old dented Stanley from a bygone era, next to the urn. It was polished to a dull sheen, a testament to decades of care. "And get rid of that thing, too," Jennings said, flicking a finger toward the thermos. "It looks unprofessional. Everything in this room needs to reflect our standards. Excellence, precision, technology." "Yes, sir," Silas murmured, his voice betraying no emotion. Watching from the corner of the room was Airman First Class Miller. He was a young communications tech, barely 20, tasked with setting up the encrypted video link for the conference. He'd been trying to ignore the Major's tirade, but it was impossible. He felt a hot flush of second-hand embarrassment and anger. He'd seen the old man around the base for months. He was quiet, kept to himself, and did his job with a quiet dignity that Miller admired. He'd seen Silas spend his own break time tending to a small patch of wildflowers near the barracks, a tiny spot of color in a world of concrete and khaki. Jennings, puffed up by his own perceived authority and with a small audience of Miller and 2 other junior officers, wasn't finished. He strode over to Silas, invading his personal space. "Let me be clear. When General Thompson and the others arrive, you make yourself scarce. You stand in that corner and you don't move. You don't speak. You are a piece of furniture. Got it?" "Understood, sir," Silas replied, his eyes focused on a smudge on the countertop. The Major, satisfied he'd established his dominance, turned to leave. But as he did, his eye caught something. Silas's simple work jacket had fallen open slightly. Pinned to the worn fabric of the inner lining was a small faded sky blue ribbon dotted with 5 tiny white stars. It was almost unnoticeable, clearly placed there not for display, but for personal remembrance. Jennings smirked, a cruel, condescending curl of his lip. "What's this, Pops? Did you win the pie-eating contest at the county fair?" He reached out with 2 fingers, a gesture of supreme disrespect, and flicked the ribbon. Cute, the touch light as it was, landed on Silas like a physical blow. The sterile briefing room, with its scent of ozone and industrial cleaner, dissolved. The quiet hum of the air conditioner was replaced by the deafening, percussive thump-thump of Huey helicopter blades tearing through thick, humid air. The air tasted of cordite mud and blood. He was 22 again, his body a knot of streaming muscle, dragging the shredded form of a 2-star general through a hellscape of shattered bamboo, and sucking mud in the Aisho Valley. Rain and sweat blinded him. The general was dying, his chest a ruin, but his eyes were lucid. With a final rattling breath, he pressed this very ribbon into Silas's hand. "They can never know it was you, son," the general had rasped, his blood slicking Silas's palm. "The mission. It never happened. But we will know. God will know." Silas blinked. The memory vanished, leaving an echo of thunder in his ears. His hand, as if with a mind of its own, moved to cover the small ribbon, shielding it. For the first time, a flicker of something deep and ancient, something profoundly sorrowful, crossed his face. His calm had been breached. Airman Miller saw it all. He saw the flick. He saw the old man's involuntary flinch and the deep haunting pain that flashed in his eyes. And he saw the ribbon. He didn't recognize it instantly, but its simple, stark design struck him as significant. It wasn't flashy. It was humble, which he was beginning to realize might be more important than all the gleaming metals on the major's chest combined. Disgust curdled in Miller's stomach. This was wrong. This was more than a major being a jerk. It felt like a desecration. He discreetly pulled out his personal cell phone, keeping his body angled away from the center of the room. His fingers flew across the screen, typing, "Military ribbon light, blue 5 white stars." The result loaded instantly. His breath caught in his throat. His eyes widened, and he had to read the words twice to believe them. Medal of Honor. Miller felt a cold dread wash over him, followed by a surge of pure righteous fury. A major had just flicked a Medal of Honor like it was a piece of lint. He knew he couldn't confront Jennings directly. He was a nobody, an airman first class. Jennings would crush him without a second thought, but he couldn't do nothing. He scrolled through his contacts, his mind racing. The conference schedule was on his datapad. General Thompson, the 4-star keynote speaker, was listed along with his aide, a Colonel Matthews. It was a long shot, a career-ending risk if he was wrong, but Miller knew in his gut that he wasn't. He slipped out of the briefing room into the empty hallway, his heart pounding against his ribs. He found the colonel's number and pressed the call button. It rang twice. Colonel Matthews, the voice was brisk, professional. "Sir," Miller began, his voice a hushed, urgent whisper. "This is Airman Miller at Creech. I'm in the SCIF briefing room for General Thompson's conference. Sir, you need to get the general down here right now." There was a pause. "Is there a threat, Airman?" "Yes, sir." "No, I mean, it's not a security threat, sir. It's about the civilian serving coffee." Miller knew how insane that sounded. "Sir, I know this is out of line, but please just get him here. Tell him it's a matter of honor." There was another long pause on the other end of the line. Miller could hear the colonel breathing, probably weighing the odds of this being a prank against the urgency in his tone. "Stay put, Airman," Matthews finally said, his voice now tight with concern. The line went dead. Miller slipped back into the room, his face pale. Jennings was now loudly explaining the capabilities of the drone feeds to the junior officers, pining like a peacock. Silas was back at his station, standing perfectly still, his face once again an unreadable mask of calm. But Miller could see the faint tremor in the old man's hands. Less than 5 minutes later, the distant sound of sirens began to grow. Jennings frowned, annoyed by the interruption. "What's that about? There's no DV arrival scheduled for another hour." The sirens grew louder, closer, culminating in the screech of tires on asphalt right outside the building. The doors to the briefing room were thrown open with such force that they banged against the walls. In strode General Marcus Thompson. He was a mountain of a man, his chest a billboard of commendations, and his 4 stars glinting on his collar. He was flanked by 2 grim-faced colonels, one of whom was Matthews, who immediately shot a glance at Miller. Thompson's face was a thundercloud, his eyes sweeping the room with cold fury. The room snapped to attention. The junior officers looked terrified. Major Jennings, however, saw his opportunity. He plastered on his best command-ready smile and stepped forward. "General Thompson, an honor, sir. We weren't expecting you so soon, but we are fully prepared to." Jennings's voice trailed off. The general's eyes had passed right over him, scanning the room as if he were a piece of transparent furniture. His gaze swept past the junior officers, past the gleaming technology, and then it stopped. It landed on the old man in the janitor's uniform, standing quietly by the coffee urns. The thunder on General Thompson's face vanished, instantly replaced by something else entirely, a look of profound, absolute, and stunned reverence. The air in the room crackled with tension. Everyone watched frozen as the 4-star general, a man who advised presidents and commanded armies, began to march across the room. He didn't stop until he was 3 feet in front of Silas. His back went ramrod straight. His arms snapped up in the sharpest, most perfect salute any of them had ever witnessed. It was a salute of utter deference, a gesture of a subordinate to a revered superior. "Chief," General Thompson's voice boomed, thick with an emotion that no one could quite place. "Sir, it is an honor to see you again." A collective, silent gasp seemed to suck the air out of the room. Major Jennings's jaw dropped, his face a mask of utter, uncomprehending shock. He looked from the 4-star general to the old janitor and back again, his mind utterly failing to process what he was seeing. Silas looked at the general holding the salute, a weary sadness in his winter sky eyes. He gave a slow, tired nod, a gesture of acknowledgement from one old soldier to another. It was all the permission the general needed. Thompson dropped his hand to his side, but remained at attention. He slowly turned his head, his gaze falling upon the pale, trembling Major Jennings. The fury was back in his eyes, now magnified to an arctic rage. "Major!" The general's voice was low, lethal, and dripped with ice. "Do you have any earthly idea who you were just speaking to?" Jennings could only stammer, his arrogance shattered into a million pieces. "Yes, sir, he's the janitorial staff. He's the janitorial staff," Thompson repeated, his voice dangerously soft. He took a step toward Jennings, who involuntarily shrank back. "Let me tell you who he is. Let me educate you, Major, since it's clear your command training was woefully inadequate." The general turned slightly, addressing the entire silent, captivated room. His voice rose, taking on the tone of a historian, reciting a sacred text. "This is Master Chief Petty Officer Silas Croft, United States Navy, retired." Though his official file says retired, that's the thinnest of cover stories. This man was a founding member of SEAL Team 6. Before that, he was Emmy's Oogie. He was the ghost behind Operation Eagle Claw in Iran. He was the shadow that slipped through the Iron Curtain to extract assets the CIA had written off for dead. In the intelligence community, they didn't even use his name. They called him the Whisperer. He would lead missions so deep, so classified that the official reports would simply state that the objective was achieved by unforeseen circumstances. Thompson paused, letting the weight of his words settle. He pointed a rigid finger at Silas. This man has more confirmed covert operations, kills than any sniper in our nation's history. A record he asked to have permanently sealed because he never saw it as a source of pride. He was the lone survivor of the Blackside Sierra incident in Afghanistan, where he held off over 200 insurgents for 2 days with nothing but a rifle, 3 magazines, and a Ka-Bar knife, protecting the intelligence that prevented a dirty bomb from being detonated in London. He has been wounded 17 times. He has been captured twice and escaped both times. He speaks 4 languages fluently and can kill a man in more ways than you know how to make a cup of coffee with your tactical barista. The general's eyes narrowed, locking onto Jennings with laser-like intensity. And that little county fair prize you felt entitled to touch. Major, his voice dropped to a seething hiss. That is the Medal of Honor. One of them. A second, more audible gasp went through the room. He was awarded 3, Thompson continued, his voice shaking with a rage that was almost holy. 2 of them are so deeply classified that they don't officially exist. They were awarded in secret by presidents who knew that this man saved the world and could never be thanked for it. This one, he gestured to the faded ribbon on the inside of Silas's jacket. This one is public record if you had ever bothered to learn your own history. It was awarded for his actions in the A Valley in 1968. As a 22-year-old petty officer, he single-handedly held off a North Vietnamese army, battalion-sized assault for 72 hours to allow for the medical evacuation of his entire company. The last man he dragged onto that final chopper was a young Green Army lieutenant who had taken a round to the chest. The general's voice cracked with emotion. That lieutenant was my father. The room was utterly silent, save for the sound of Major Jennings's ragged breathing. He was ashen, his body trembling uncontrollably. His entire world, his career built on image and bluster, had been dismantled and incinerated in less than 5 minutes. He was staring at a living legend he had just dismissed as grandpa. General Thompson turned his back on Jennings, a gesture of final dismissal. He faced his aide. Colonel Matthews, you will escort the major from this room. He is relieved of his command effective immediately. I want his resignation on my desk by 1700 hours. His career in the United States Air Force is over. Make it clear to him that he is lucky he isn't being brought up on charges under U.S. Code Title 18 Section 704 for disrespect to a Medal of Honor recipient. Yes, General, Matthews said, his voice grim. He and the other colonel moved toward Jennings, who looked like he was about to collapse. They took him by the arms and quietly escorted him from the room, his shining career reduced to a walk of shame. The room remained in a state of stunned silence. Everyone's eyes were on Silas, who hadn't moved. He looked weary, as if the recitation of his own history was a heavier burden than any mission. General Thompson turned back to him, his expression softening into one of deep familial concern. Chief Silas, I am so sorry. I had no idea you were working here. We can arrange something. A pension adjustment, proper recognition. Silas held up a gnarled hand, and the 4-star general fell silent. The old man's gaze drifted across the room and settled on Airman Miller, who was still standing by the wall, looking terrified and struck. Silas gave him a small, almost imperceptible smile. A look of profound gratitude that made the young airman stand a little taller. Then Silas turned his gaze back to the general. His voice, when he finally spoke, was not angry or vindicated. It was gentle, tired, and filled with a grandfatherly wisdom that seemed to emanate from the very core of the earth. He's just a boy, Marcus, Silas said quietly, using the general's first name. Full of noise and pride, the way we all were once. The uniform, the rank, the shiny new tech. It can make a man forget what's important. It can make him think respect is something he can demand instead of something he must earn. He walked over to his old dented thermos and unscrewed the cap. The rich aroma of perfectly brewed coffee filled the air. "The lesson is more important than the punishment," Silas continued, his voice a quiet murmur that nonetheless commanded the absolute attention of everyone present. "You break a man like that, you just make him bitter. But if you teach him, if you let him learn humility, you might just save an officer. That's a better service to this country than ending another career." General Thompson stood speechless, humbled by the old warrior's incredible grace. Here was a man who had every right to be vengeful, to demand retribution. Yet, he chose forgiveness and instruction. The general could only nod, his throat tight with emotion. Silas poured a cup of coffee from his thermos into a simple ceramic mug. He held it out to the general. "It's still hot," he said simply. General Thompson, a man who commanded global power, reached out and took the cup. His own hands, which bore the weight of immense responsibility, trembled slightly as he accepted the humble offering from the scarred, gnarled hands that had saved his father, shaped secret history, and now simply wanted to make sure the coffee was right. The legend of that day would echo through the halls of Creech for decades. A quiet but powerful reminder that heroes are not defined by the shine on their boots or the rank on their collar, but by the quiet dignity of their service. If this story resonated with you, consider sharing it so that these lessons of humility and respect for those who have served are never forgotten.